nous sommes heureux de vous accueillir, Santi CENTINEO. Donc vous êtes architecte, professeur de design intérieur et scénographie au Politecnico di Bari, diplômé de l'université de Palerme. Après, vous êtes spécialisé au théâtre alla Scala de Milan. Vous avez passé votre doctorat en design d'intérieur et scénographie au Politecnico de Milan et sous la direction d'Andrea Branzi. Vous avez travaillé comme scénographe dans plusieurs des plus importants opéras du monde, Venise, donc la Fenice, Bologne, Gênes, Turin, il Maggio musicale fiorentino, Tokyo, Philadelphie, Madrid, Bilbao. Et en 2006, vous avez reçu le prix Pierluigi Samaritani en tant que meilleur jeune scénographe italien. Donc vos sujets de recherche sont nombreux, hein, ils vont de l'intériorité, des espaces intérieurs, donc de domestiques, disons, à la scénographie, la représentation, l'installation artistique dans le paysage et la sémiotique du design industriel, ce qui vient évidemment de Andrea Branzi, je pense. Alors, votre intervention, donc elle est intitulée Cloisters in the Opera, Puccini's Suor Angelica and Poulenc's Les Dialogues des Carmélitaines. C'est un peu en anglais, un peu en français, mais votre intervention va être en anglais.
Because the titles are French, but Italian, but
Italien, oh.
yes.
Alors je vous passe la parole, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here. The representation of the architectural interior in theater scene design is a phenomenon that basically begins with the theater of the modern age. In fact, in the Greek theater, the interior was not represented, much less the sacred place, perhaps because it was already present in the architecture of the Greek theater itself. This passage, characteristic of the Renaissance period, coincides with the introduction of perspective and the emergence of indoor theaters. While in open-air theaters, the representation of an internal place is always made difficult by the lack of credibility of the renunciation of the use of scale reduction, the same cannot be said in the opposite case, that is, the representation of an open place in an indoor theater. This second case goes beyond the theme now discussed, more focused on the representation of a closed place par excellence, namely the cloister. There is a broad case history of enclosed places represented in the theater. Halls in palaces that conventionally are places of decisions or intrigues in historical dramas, or even private places, whenever the most intimate events of the plot require it. From the bourgeois living room to the bedroom, from the bohemian attic to the small oriental house, from the hut to the kitchen. Among all these places circumscribed, certainly the cloister is a case apart. The etymology of the word, as we have seen today, this morning, meets us in understanding the specifics of a place that is closed by definition, but is not an isolated hermitage inhabited by a single character. The cloister is a micro-community, and there is no theatrical work in which it does not express an act of will with regard to the reason for inclusion in it, linked to the events of the protagonists, whether they assume a diegetic importance that is aimed at the story, both with symbolic and psychological values. Two monumental episodes of musical theater can be mentioned: Donizetti, La Favorite, and Verdi's Don Carlo, both written in French on the structural model of the Grand Opéra by two Italian composers for two Parisian theaters. The first, La Favorite, while based on historical events, opens and ends in a monastery of invention, while the second, Don Carlos, in the second, the place of the voluntary cloister of Charles V is evoked in a way to say the least singular. It is the place of retire of those who intended to give up the rest of the world to that temporality that instead grips the characters, binding them to their frail human miseries and condemning all to unhappiness. Philip II will say in his melancholy and poignant aria Elle ne m'aime pas, Je dormirai d'un mon manteau royal quand aura lui pour moi l'heure dernière. Je dormirai sous les voûtes de pierre des caveaux de l'Escurial. Furthermore, the cloister is the counterpart of the Inquisition, expression of a powerful and tyrannic Catholic Church, continuously present in the opera, and that culminate in the auto da fe scene. The cloister also represents the religion regarded under its more spiritual aspect. In the Italian version, the great cut of Fontainebleau forest scene configures the structure of the opera with the opening and closing of the story just on the cloister of Saint Just, with the same words of a monk. The monk, you understand at the end, other is not except Charles V himself. The through cloister, essentially penitential, is therefore that of the world, while from the cloister the voice of Charles V expresses the existential warning that summarizes in a verse the pain of all the characters. Mon fils, les douleurs de la terre nous suivront en ces lieux. La paix que votre cœur espère ne se trouve qu'auprès de Dieu. Ces lieux refers to the cloister, as it emerged perfectly from the Italian edition of the opera revised by Verdi himself. The original text is the Italian one. The French translation is mine. I hope it's correct. It's interesting how the same meaning of the new version could express two mirrored aspects of the same item, the cloister. In the first one, the French version, is a place where to find the interior peace. In the second one, the Italian version, it is the place allowing to escape the interior war. During the 20th century, the historical matrix of the previous century, with its references true or likely, is abandoned to the advantage of a more realistic one, more psychological and attentive to the nuance of meaning. In particular, worthy of attention are two musical masterpieces, Suor Angelica by Giacomo Puccini and Les Dialogues de Carmelite by Francis Poulenc. We certainly have a lot to do with claustrophilia in the most literal and specific meaning of the words. Suor Angelica is the second opera of Puccini's Trittico, a sequence of 3 unique acts that debuted at New York Metropolitan Opera in 1918. Puccini documented himself for a long time on the cloistered life. In particular, he observed the life of his sister Eugenia, Mother Superior of the convent of the Augustinian nuns in the village of Vico Pelago in Lucca. Here he performed the opera on the piano, obtaining a great success. Another decisive figure was his friend Pietro Panichelli, a Dominican, who had already helped him with the religious sound for Tosca, the Te Deum of the first act, and the bells of dawn on Rome. Puccini wrote to Panichelli, "I'm writing a cloistered or monastic work, so I need several Latin words ad hoc. My science does not reach to your heaven." The work is entirely composed by female characters. After 7 years of total seclusion and silent waiting, Sister Angelica received a visit. She is her aunt princess, a character wrapped in her mystery, very severe, custodian of an emotional knot and a memory of painful events. From the cruel dialogue between the two protagonists, the terrible secret emerges. Sister Angelica had an illegitimate son, and for this reason she was forced to retire to the convent in order not to tarnish the honor of the family. Now that the sister is going to marry, the aunt comes to ask for the signature to divide the family estate. At the request of Sister Angelica, the aunt finally announces that the son of guilt, after a violent fever, has died. Left alone and devoured by pain, Sister Angelica, herbalist of the convent, prepares a poisonous decoction and kills herself to reach her son, understanding soon, however, that, dying in mortal sin, she will never meet him again. The miracle shines. Among the heavenly choirs, the miraculous appearance of the Son, accompanied by the Virgin, seals the heavenly forgiveness for the unfortunate nun. Le Dialogue de Carmelite is inspired by the event of the Martyrs of Compiègne, really happened in 1794. The story was transcribed in 1947 by Georges Bernanos to make a movie. The project was abandoned soon, but the far-sighted Giulio Ricordi in 1953 proposed to make an opera out of it, commissioning Francis Poulenc, who, inspired by Bernanos, would draw the libretto from it. After a genesis of 3 years, the opera debuted at Milan La Scala in January 1957, with a stellar cast: Virginia Zeani, Gianna Pederzini, Gigliola Frazzoni, Laila Genzer, and Fiorenza Cossotto, conducted by Nino Sanzogno. From there, it quickly spread to theaters around the world, performed by the most famous opera stars. 6 months later, he was at Paris Opera with Rita Gore and Regine Crespin, and another 3 months later at the Metropolitan Opera in New York with Dorothy Kirsten and Leontine Price. In a very short time, Alfredo Kraus sang it in Trieste, John Sutherland, conducted by Raphael Kubelik, and London Covent Garden. Before taking a look at some contemporary stagings, it is necessary to quickly deepen the different conception that the cloister takes on in the two operas, certainly to be understood not only as the place of a mere setting in the unfolding of events, but to be also considered in its multiple meanings, symbolic and psychological. Both composers, in these inspired two operas, immediately highlight how the two protagonists are two women radically different from the others surrounding them. Sister Angelica is very different from all the other sisters that are framed in the beginning of the opera as childish, repressed, superficial. Later she confronts her aunt princess, an austere character, Teutonic, inscrutable, as Sister Angelica herself says, "My mother's sister, you are hard-hearted." In Puccini, all the seemingly insignificant and verbose details of the long initial description are actually not so useless and meaningless. The miracle of the fountain, the ray of the sun that once in a year enters the cloister and is reflected in the water, heralds how that will be the day of the greatest miracle, a miracle that is a nightmare, mystical vision, hysterical madness at the same time. It is also the moment when the place of the claustrophilia, the convent, is transformed into something else, with the apparition of the Virgin and the Child, from hell on earth to a hypothesis of paradise. Hypothesis because obviously the ending of the opera leaves place for a huge number of possible interpretations. Unlike Suor Angelica, Le Dialogue does not take place entirely in a convent. Indeed, it begins at the home of the Marquise de la Force and ends in a square with the public execution of the Carmelite. It is clear from the beginning that the protagonist, Blanche, seeks in Carmel a refuge for her fears. Je ne mépris pas le monde est seulement pour moi comme un élément où je ne saurais vivre. Apparently fearful and insecure, not to mention fragile nurse, Blanche will have an interview with the prieur who at the point of death leaves her a sort of spiritual testament. Non, ma fille, nous ne sommes pas une entreprise de mortification ou de conservatoire de vertu. Nous sommes des maisons de prière. La prière seule justifie notre existence. Je n'ai pas d'autre refuge, en effet. Et la prière, notre règle, n'est pas un refuge. Ce n'est pas la règle qui nous garde, ma fille. C'est nous qui gardons la règle. The very name chosen by Blanche for the cloistral life, Sœur Blanche de l'Agonie de Christ, will be significant of the supreme sacrifice she will make. The strictly religious moments, almost pieces of sacred music inserted in the structure of the opera, are of great inspiration. An Ave Maria, an Ave Verum Corpus, up to the thrilling climax of the finale with the Salve Regina, Ecole, in which Poulenc inserts the guillotine strokes that gradually reduce the chorus. The broken song of the last sister is taken by surprise by a voice that makes its way through the crowd. It's Blanche, who, sinking in seculorum secula, rises to the guillotine with a last inexorable stroke that concludes the story. Once defined some of the main themes of this place, the cloister, I will review some significant staging of these two masterworks. Let's start from Suor Angelica. A classic edition, that of New York Metropolitan 2007, directed by Jack O'Brien, scenes by Douglas Smith, costumes by Jess Goldstein, sung by Barbara Frittoli, and conducted by James Levine, in which, thanks to the lighting design, the cloister described in the libretto by Gioacchino Forzano is visually transformed into the interior of a church. At the point of death of the protagonist, the doors open wide, letting in the angelic appearance of the child. A very classical interpretation, and adhering to the libretto, which perhaps does not explain all the possible interpretative readings left open by the author. There are other interpretations to provide other possible keys of interpretation, and many of them present recurring threads, the theme of madness, for example, or in any case of illness. Whatever it is, Sister Angelica, according to the libretto, is an herbalist nun, or nurse. The San Francisco War Memorial Opera House edition, 2009, directed by Patrick Summers, conducted by James Robinson, scenes by Alan Moyer, costumes by Bruno Schwengle, which stars Patricia Racette in the role of Sister Angelica and Eva Podlos in that of Aunt Princess. The setting is an infirmary. The dialogue between the two women is a moment of great intensity for the type of characterization of the character of the Hound. Cynical, ruthless, not even so noble in the ways and forms. At the moment of death, hearing the noise, a child looks out from behind the door of the infirmary, quickly recalled by another nun. Richard Jones' performance in 2011, The Royal Opera House, scenes by Miriam Buter and costumes by Nikki Gillibrand, conducted by Antonio Pappano, with Hermonella Jao and Anna Lerson, is also an hospital setting. Sister Angelica is in fact a nurse pharmacist of a children's hospital. The scene of Aunt Princess' visit takes place with a change of scene that brings the action to the front, as in a sort of parlor. In the end, Sister Angelica poisons herself with her own drugs, and in the last moments, awakened by the confusion, one of the children admitted to the hospital gets up and sees his nurse sick. In the delirium of the poisoning, Sister Angelica mistakes it for a vision. She dies in the collective cynicism of all her sisters, who forcibly separate her from the child. They cover the body with a sheet to hide it from the children, put the little patients back to bed, and tidy up the trolley of drugs. Even more explicit is the theme of madness, intertwined with the theme of enclosure or imprisonment in the direction signed together with the scenes by Andrea De Rosa, costumes by Alessandro Ciammarughi for Naples Teatro di San Carlo, 2016, with Maria José Siri and Luciana D'Intino, conducted by Donato Renzetti. Entirely carried out behind the bars of a cloister that's also the confinement of madness, in the highly emotional finale, Sister Angelica dies while a mentally ill internee offers her as a gift her own doll. More extreme is the unaffected vision by Luca Ronconi, scenes by Margherita Palli, costumes by Silvia Imonino, conduction by Riccardo Chailly, Milan Teatro alla Scala, 2008. Renouncer as usual in Ronconi of any emotion, and who focuses everything, as he often did at the end of his career, on the magnifying of some elements. In this case, a huge statue of the Virgin knocked down to the ground, practicable, and crossed by the nuns who above it seem almost little ants, while the apparition of the final miracle is delegated to a small statue. Damiano Micheletto's interpretation, 2012, Theatre under Vin, scenes by Paolo Fantin, costumes by Carla Teti, is related to the other two operas that make up Puccini's Trittico. In fact, all three works spring from containers, and in the case of Suor Angelica, the settlement is a refuge for single mothers, in the hands of naughty nuns, following the model of the movie Magdalene by Peter Mullan in 2002. About Les Dialogues de Carmelite, the greater length of the work, the diversification of the settings between external and different interiors creates different design constraints rather than in Suor Angelica. A very beautiful edition, especially considering the years in which it was produced in 1987 by the Metropolitan Opera of New York with the same singer, Regine Crespin, 30 years after her debut, is the one signed for the direction of John Dexter and David Reppa for sets and costumes. Singer was an amazing Jesse Norman, conducted by Manuel Rosenthal. All settings take place on a cross-shaped platform, evoking a crossroad, the transept of a church, and finally, in the last scene, when, as in the libretto, the crowd who attended the public execution of the nuns disperses, the inevocable reference to Calvary. The beautiful award-winning edition directed by Olivier P., production of the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées of 2013, with scenes and costume by Pierre-André Weiss, conducted by Alain Altenoglu, accompanies, scene by scene, the psychology of the characters with the extreme flexibility of the scenes and scene changes at sight. P works a lot on the theme of religious enclosure, understood as a reversal of the revolutionary ideals of liberté, fraternité, égalité. The representation of the cloister at certain times allows a glimpse of the outside. In others, it lets the light filter. In others, it transforms into a huge cross. In the poetic last scene, the nuns die one by one under a starry sky of great stylistic and symbolic purity. But the most desirable purity for this work is undoubtedly that of Robert Carsen, with scenes by Michael Levine, costumes by Volk Bauer, production of the Nederlandse Opera of Amsterdam. An almost empty scene and an acting that accompanies the emotional flow moment by moment are the main feature of this staging. Carsen worked a lot on acting, and it can be said that the real scenography is given by the composition of the singers' bodies in the scenic space, until the end, where, without bloodshed, but with the stylization of great purity, the nuns fall, one at a time, until the turn of Blanche, the Holy, to remain standing, symbol of an immortal life. I would like to, because we have some minutes still, the video of this finale, because it's very, in my opinion, it's very impressive. This is this one. Okay, I just double click, right? Yes. shortly conclude my just 1 minute, and it was okay. Yes, there are many reflections that can be. Well, it doesn't matter. I can continue in this way. There are many reflections that can be carried out at the end of my very rapid and synthetic exposition. Certainly, the theater is a large metaphorical lens that is slightly moved, allows us to focus on details, or details that may escape from another angle. No less simply, it can be asserted that thanks to the scenic fiction, what is plausible representation of reality, but in fact absolutely unreal, can open a vast imaginary. And this also applies to the cloister, which in reality is a closed, circumscribed, even forbidden and impenetrable place, but the lens of the theater projects us many visions that accompany us in reflections, not only on stage, as long as the show lasts, but also behind the scenes. And this is a backstage photo of a Suor Angelica edition that I found very curious, because only the costumes is sufficient to transform the corridors of the theater into a new setting, a new. Okay, thank you very much.
Bon, merci à vous pour cette contribution. Donc on sent le regard du scénographe, donc quelqu'un qui pratique un peu le métier de scénographe. Et j'avais juste c'est pas une question, en effet c'est plutôt une curiosité, mais je vais traduire en italien après. C'est-à-dire si en tant que scénographe, vous avez été confronté à la conception et à la réalisation de lieux clos, et donc disons quels sont les dispositifs que vous avez mis en œuvre, mis au point pour en fait, rendre et recréer cette relation entre l'intériorité des personnages qui sont enfermés et le lieu qui les enferme, parce que c'est sur ce point que votre contribution a porté. Allora, in italiano ça serait, a parte i ringraziamenti insomma, per questa lettura molto fine e che risente in effetti dello sguardo di qualcuno di uno scenografo, di qualcuno che pratica anche proprio il progetto della scenografia. Se in quanto scenografo lei è stato confrontato al progetto di tali luoghi in cui e come lei ha tentato di mettere quindi in relazione l'interiorità dei personaggi.
To be honest, I showed during this presentation a project of mine, but I didn't write but and is this one that's a favorite edition. The idea, as the director was Spanish, it was just since a few years inaugurated the new addition to Prado Museum by Rafael Moneo, and it was a reuse of the cloister, of an old monastery cloister. So the idea, as Favorita, probably is one of the most beautiful Donizetti music, but the plot, the text, is very, as it is a pastiche. The text is very fragile. There are many irrational things and so away. Well, the idea was to transform this history in starting, as the history says, in a cloister, but during the 4 acts of the opera, this cloister was reformed until the end, where step by step. The problem is here I don't have all the other sketches, the other bozzettos I have here, but not in this presentation. Well, it wasn't previewed to show you this. At the end, this cloister transforms into a museum where all the different items seen during all the acts and characters themselves becomes part of the exhibition of the museum. The favorite, the protagonist herself, is an object. La favorita, let's be clear, is a woman object of the king. So each one in this opera at the end transforms into an item exhibited in this new museum that in the meanwhile is reforming during the 4 acts. I had also, but here I don't have the pictures, a project for Sister Angelica. And in our vision, the vision of, I always have worked with very particular directors. The vision of the director was that the child has never died. It's only a lie that the Hound Princess tells to Sister Angelica in order to make her sign the estate division of the division of the estate of the family. So at the end, during the chorus, the final chorus, the chorus actually could be a nun's chorus, as if they sang during the mass. So Suor Angelica dies behind the altar, hearing this chorus. He believes in the delirium, he believes they are angels, the miracle, and whatever, and in the final scenes, the Hound Princess with the child appears during the mass to receive the sacraments during the and praying, both praying. So, well, it's a final scene that leaves open many questions of this opera. This opera is very difficult because it's a borderline opera. It could be an excess of romanticism, on the contrary, a total madness, total mental delirium. So it's very. I could speak of this theme for hours, so please kill me before.
Non, mais merci beaucoup. Ça nous a manqué un peu peut-être le point de vue des artistes, des concepteurs, et peut-être ça pourrait être traité dans un second moment de notre colloque claustrophile. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Si vous avez des curiosités, des commentaires?
Juste une remarque à propos de la dernière image. Alors, non, plus une remarque générale, parce qu'on a un séminaire de recherche en ce moment qui est actif et sur la question qui est animé par Laure Fernandez, qui est une de nos chercheurs à Camondo, et qui est spécialisée dans les arts de la scène, dans la scénographie, les arts du spectacle et le théâtre. Et on a un séminaire qui est consacré à la scène, théâtralité, performance. Et donc peut-être que effectivement, ce serait intéressant de vous y faire intervenir pour venir parler à la fois de la théorie et de la pratique, parce que c'est évidemment toujours très passionnant. J'ai beaucoup aimé l'image du couloir, des backstage avec les costumes, parce que, alors, il se trouve que j'habite juste derrière, là, rue Boissonnade. Et rue Boissonnade, il y a 2 couvents. Il y a un couvent des Capucins, puis il y a les visitandines. Et effectivement, on a des moines et des sœurs qui sont habillés avec leurs costumes de claustration, pour le coup. Et que cette rue est un peu une rue perdue, c'est une petite rue dans laquelle il y a peu de passages. Et que le simple fait de voir passer un homme habillé en robe de bure, en costume de moine, dit que l'habit ne fait pas le moine, mais finalement c'est le moine qui fait l'ambiance. Et cette ambiance ici est assez décalée, elle est assez, elle a quelque chose de fantastique, d'irréel, par rapport à ce qu'on recherche effectivement dans cette claustration qu'on a déjà vue avec des incursions un peu surréelles ou irréelles. Voilà, je ne sais pas s'il n'y a pas plus de questions. Peut-être Charlotte, tu te sens pour lancer un micro-débat? Ou est-ce qu'on...
what I really appreciate in your presentation is, I think from yesterday, this is the first time we have a presentation, of course, about scenography, but as a community of human being that is confined, because we study catacomb. You understand catacomb? Like kind of underground town that happened in Paris, not so far from there. Ah, on est sur des... Ah. Okay, so I didn't know. And I think to end this colloquium, it's quite nice because we start with Foucault, and I can't forget also about Hoffman and the total institution. And your presentation, if I just try to take a bit distance from strictly scenography, just offers the opportunity to unfocus about claustration and also be concentrate on people who are living in confinement and here as an institution. And it brings us to needs of people and to programs of places that we talk about that, but not so far. So it's, for me, it's a quite nice summary of everything that these 2 days has to address. So just thank you for that. I have no question, but I really appreciate that.
Just a curiosity, in Sister Angelica especially, we have many nuns. I don't know, I don't remember, 12 I think, plus the chorus of nuns, so a lot of nuns, and they are dressed all so this is a problem for the public to recognize on the scene who is that one, who is that. So normally costumes designer do something, design some little details to distinguish all the sisters, so that at the end they are all the same order, religious order, but there is a detail that allows the public. This is a technical, but it's very curious and it's interesting. So at the end, no, that's Sor Angelica, that's Sister, and so away, because they are perfectly recognizable. Okay, thank you.